ClandesTime.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to ClandesTime. I am Tom Secker, coming to you from the grassy knolls of North Yorkshire, and this is episode 62, Homeland Season 5, episode 6.
The Russians used your operation to try to take me out, and it was not their first attempt. Why do you think that we're meeting like this instead of me just knocking on your door?
Maybe because you knew I wouldn't answer it.
It's time to go to the authorities.
I don't know who to trust.
Trust me!
You haven't been tailed?
I'm tired of the bad judgment. You're screwing your coworker, and you are holding out right now.
You picked me up off the streets and gave me your blood. I'm pleased to help.
You are an American.
A spy.
Today, Pearse and I discuss the 6th episode of Homeland, Parabiosis, which saw the return of the classic spies versus jihadis type of storyline. We looked at the two halves of the story: Quinn holed up in a refugee hostel, or terrorist halfway house, and ultimately him killing this Reel Bad Arab character, Hajik. And on the other side, Saul rediscovering that he is actually a skilled secret agent. Both of these storylines are less about inducing a state of hyperreality, and much more about shaping our perceptions of the real world. We discuss, for example, why it is that Russia is portrayed in Homeland as a patient, sneaky, intelligent people, but in news media supposedly reporting on real-life events, they are portrayed as brutish thugs. In the other storyline, we dissect the fight scene between Quinn and Hajik as a metaphor for the struggle between the Western military intelligence establishments and Islam. Well, welcome Pearse, welcome back to ClandesTime. As always, I'm looking forward to talking to you about Homeland as part of this marathon review series that we've embarked upon, and I hope you're doing well.
Yeah, I'm doing great. As always, I'm so excited to be talking about Homeland again, and I think we had another great episode this week, so I'm really excited to get into it. And again, it's like another one of these episodes that's just completely different from everything else that's happened thus far in this season.
It certainly is, and today we are, of course, talking about the 6th episode in Homeland Season 5, and as per usual, everyone should go out and watch it before listening any further. But just to sum up what happened in this episode, it's a bit easier than normal, because about half of the storylines from this season just don't appear in this episode. I mean, Newman's not in this episode at all, Laura Poitras is only in it for a moment. The storyline almost entirely centres around what I think we could call classic Homeland territory, i.e. the internal struggles of the CIA and all of these nasty bearded muzzies getting up to no good. So the episode begins with a group of terror suspects being released from prison because all of the evidence against them had been gathered illegally as part of this CIA spying operation that was exposed in episode 1. A handful of them reconstitute, or whatever, their jihadi terrorist cell, and naturally, and coincidentally, and very usefully for the plotline, this just so happens to be in the exact same building that Quinn's mysterious guardian angel had taken him to from the last episode. And as predicted, they are planning a big terrorist attack in Berlin, or at least in Western Europe, and the boss jihadi, who is fresh out of prison, he's one of these guys who's just been released, he doesn't like Quinn, he thinks Quinn is a spy, and this ultimately culminates in a fight between the two of them, and Quinn kills the jihadi.
Yeah, pretty awesome.
Yeah. In the other, somewhat less interesting, but still quite fun part of the storyline, I did like all of the other half as well. Carrie and Saul finally meet up, and Carrie explains the whole thing to him, that the Russians bombed the plane, that the Russians are now trying to kill her, and conveniently, that she needs Saul to steal a copy of these documents so that she can read them and find out what it is that the Russians don't want her to know. Saul refuses, of course, but due to Alison's double agent scheming, she manages to pit Saul and Dar against one another, And so Daradal has come to suspect that Saul and the Israelis blew up the plane completely, but that's what he's got in his head. So he has Saul's security clearance revoked. Saul actually then has to do some proper spy stuff in order to steal the documents, and he passes them on to Otto Düring, the head of the Foundation, and he then smuggles them to Carrie. And this bit of story ends with Saul being taken away by the CIA, and Carrie being given the documents just before she boards a plane to once again run away from her problems and the mess that she has created. So that's essentially what happened. There's only really two halves, I think, to this storyline. I really enjoyed this one. It felt much more like a spy show. How did you feel about this? Did you really get into this episode like I did?
Yeah, I liked that it was sort of back to some of the classic Homeland stuff. It was nice to also see Saul, being able to employ some of his, espionage tricks and whatnot. I loved the scene where he gets the security sweep team to go in and start messing around in the room, and so he he puts a little thumb drive in, and very fast he gets it and runs out the door before they even notice. I loved, it's nice to see Saul remembering how to be a spy, even though he seemed to not be able to tell the most obvious tale following him until Carrie pointed it out. But that aside, that was great. But yeah, it did have the feeling of like classic sort of, spy drama. And that's great, because sometimes the show can get a little bit sort of hung up on interpersonal relationships. And while that's interesting, I think that what the show can do really well is this sort of material. So yeah, I loved it. I thought it was great. It was kind of nice not to have to deal with Newman or Laura or, any of those other storylines, and just sort of try their best to kind of move along what's going to be some sort of arc. So yeah, I thought that was all great. And then even interspersed in that, there were some really interesting ideas that they were implanting throughout this episode as well. But it was nice to just have like a fun episode where you're really engaged. It's nerve-wracking. I don't think we've had that yet in this season.
No, I don't think we have. I was going to say that much as I like the geopolitical and the hyperreal elements to this show, much as I find that very interesting and very, very fun to watch in a lot of ways, like you say, this episode was a bit different to all of the others, in that it was mostly just classic spy tale, right? Mm-hmm. It was mostly just surveillance, counter-surveillance, people tricking. I loved the bit when Saul goes into the club near the end, the sort of gentleman's club, where he's going to give Otto Düring the flash drive, and he hangs his coat up, and it's so obvious that, he slipped it into the guy's coat pocket then, and he got into the room, and then the guys come rushing in, and they search both of them, and then neither of them have the flash drive, and it's like, did they not think this guy might have a coat? Or These CIA security guys weren't very good, but nonetheless, it was fun to watch. It was quite fast-paced, and it was just a bit simpler. And I think, like I say, there wasn't much going on in terms of the hyper-real elements to this. I haven't really seen any news stories or anything else that would relate to the events portrayed in this episode, because they were mostly taking place in the sort of within the Homeland world itself. And I think we've, to be fair, kind of hammered that concept home in our reviews so far. So at least for this episode, maybe we can do something a little different. I was going to say, the hyper-real or hyperreality technique, as it seems to be have now become in this show, is all about, like we keep saying, confusing people's ability to distinguish between reality and fiction. But this episode seemed much more about directly trying to shape our perceptions of the real world. Not really about confusing us, but actually trying to push some propaganda in a very straightforward way in certain respects.
Yeah.
So I think we'll start. Should we start with Quinn? Quinn in the Jihadis storyline?
Sure. That was my favorite, probably.
Yeah. I do think that's the more fun half of this episode, for sure. And the opening scene, right, where these terror suspects are being let out of prison, I just found it utterly ridiculous, because they've just like lined them up. They give them all their whatever wallets back or things, and then they just walk out through a gate. Aren't they supposed to be in like a maximum security jail? Or I mean,
of course, they walk out and they're letting journalists get up close to them and ask them questions and whatnot. Pretty unbelievable. And of course, we get Hajik, the tried and true Reel Bad Arab, with this sort of permanent scowl on his face. He's always angry about how the Americans or the whatever Germans humiliated us. He's not very smart either. He's pretty stupid. They make that, very apparent. And Quinn basically has to explain to him that you do realize that the police are spying on you, that you're really afraid to go fight in Syria, blah, blah, blah. And Hajik is just, basically just the most irritating character we've had, in the whole thing. But yeah, of course. And then they drive back to literally the scariest, most rundown place in all of Berlin, which was again, it was sort of blatant, very obvious propaganda there. They drive to this sort of like cul-de-sac area with, and there's garbage cans on fire everywhere and, children running around and, about 1,000 people living in this like rundown building, and it's sort of, they're basically implying, it's sort of half refugees and then half terrorists. And so again, they're back to pushing, I think they spent a lot of time, as you said, in the beginning trying to kind of confuse us. And now they're sort of solidifying like, okay, but this is what we actually do really want you to believe. So, this is what it's like. It's these rundown, scary buildings that are dirty and filthy, and it's refugees and terrorists. And even that, it's like, the doctor that we see is probably, I wrote in my notes, maybe the most positive Muslim character that we've had on the show.
Yes.
Yet even he can't practice medicine in Germany, so he manages this terrorist refugee safe house, hotel in Berlin. And he doesn't like Hajik, but he doesn't really seem to have a problem with any of these other jihadis that are in fact planning on bombing some target in Berlin and, killing tens of thousands of people. So even the best, most positive Muslim character that really does care about Quinn and does seem like a good person is like, well, that's okay though. That's fine. Or he doesn't really put up much of a fight, So that was a really, another one of these sort of interesting aspects of, what, again, there's really no good, the only good Muslim character we've had in the entire series was the, half Colombian, half Lebanese CIA agent, who again was, Carrie didn't even trust him. So, yeah.
No, I mean, one note that I made is just in that opening scene, because it's taking place at night as well. It's all dark and rainy and
it's raining.
And it just made me think of like these are like wild animals being let out into the streets. That's, I think, what you're supposed to think. You see, sort of, the gates being opened and they're off out into the darkness. I think there's pretty clear imagery, to be honest, going on there. But you're right. As the story progresses and we end up in this whatever terrorist halfway house, I don't even know what the hell like you say. It's a sort of mixture of different imagery, and that's clearly a mixture they've done quite intentionally. But yeah, we have the good Muslim, the guy who's looking after Quinn, and we have the bad Muslim who wants to blow something up, and it is quite simplistic moralizing, if you ask me, because all of the good Muslim characters that we've had in this series, I mean, in the whole series since way back when, pretty much all of them have worked for the CIA in some way, or at least helped them.
Yeah.
We've had Ayan, who ended up dead after being a unwitting CIA asset. We had Farah, the translator, who ended up dead after working for the CIA, and basically ended up dead because she worked for the CIA. Remind me, there haven't been that many good.
Oh, well, we have, there's a couple of, there was like the imam's wife in the first or second season.
Yeah.
Who, of course, with the very, patriarchal, abusive husband, and she has to sneak away to tell Carrie that, there's terrorists all over the place. We have that. We have, again, the I forgot about Farah. She is, I guess, a positive Muslim character.
You could say Brody.
Brody is another.
He converts to Islam, but he is very much this. And he, of course, ends up as a CIA agent and a congressman.
Yeah, and then ends up being brutally hung in Iran. So
again, because he worked for the CIA. It's not a good life being a Muslim working for the CIA in this show.
No,
fair to say. They're basically saying to you, that's the only way you can be a good Muslim, but expect to die.
Right, in a pretty brutal way too.
Usually in a pretty horrible
none of them get a quiet death at home. They get their throat slit or their head blown off by their uncle or hung
or
by a
public.
Yeah. I will say one thing that just sort of popped in my head that I'd sort of forgot when I was watching it. We're talking about all these Muslim prisoners being released. Is that no one ever has been released due to this illegal spying? That was something that I just don't believe would ever happen. It's not like Germany is doing that right now. No, you're right. So it's sort of like, and it's funny because they harken back to like I think the first episode where Saul and Allison met with the BND people, and he was like, oh, they're going to throw out all of our cases. So again, pushing that sort of idea that these omnipotent, powerful intelligence agencies aren't really that, they get pushed around by the courts and legality. And again, they're obviously, pointing the finger at the fact that, oh, look, you exposed our illegal spying, but we were really just spying on these evil Muslims. And now they're on the street. Now they're going to blow up a school or some shit like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's all of those different messages kind of being fixed into this storyline now. Because it is kind of shaping up as to some extent as we've been predicting, although obviously some of our predictions no. I did like the way they split them into this dichotomy where you have clearly the good Muslim doesn't like the bad Muslim, and he only really tolerates him because there isn't an awful lot of choice. And then, let me ask you about this. When at the end of the episode, as Quinn is attempting to leave this refugee hostel, the evil Muslim, what's his name, Hajik?
Yeah, Hajik.
Stops him and picks a fight with him. And even though Quinn is half dead, he's seriously injured by this point. Yeah. And the bad Muslim is much larger, and he's got a knife, and he fights dirty, he fights like a coward, all of that. Quinn still defeats him and just kills him with his bare hands. And I can't help but feel that's a metaphor that they've put in there. As in, a lot of violence is actually metaphorical in these sorts of things. I mean, let me ask you first. What do you think? What do you make of this, metaphorically speaking? Well, I mean, I guess, we have the evil Muslim jihadi that was probably, in reality is trained by the CIA. But, in this, he was, radicalized because the Germans humiliated him or something like that. And he's going up against the CIA now. But I think the fact that Quinn obviously represents the agency and he's weak and defeated, and we have this, powerful, dangerous jihadi who's obviously supposed to be sort of ISIS. That's that representation, I guess. And yet that, the CIA, triumphant, wins. So, I mean, that's a powerful metaphor. I think that they're trying to, in a way, they're trying to represent that, the CIA is just, again, this little tiny organization that gets pushed around, but that ultimately they're the only, even if you don't like them, even if they're weak, even if they're, and perhaps maybe Quinn's, weaknesses represent, something negative about them, that they're not quite whole, that there's something missing from them, Quinn he's lost all this blood. Maybe, and I'm getting really kind of, out there, but, that they've lost some of their own humanity or something like that they're these sort of zombie-like people, but yet they're the only group out there that can defeat them. Again, in this really grotesque manner, he breaks his trachea and he coughs up blood, and very visceral killing too. Like and again, he hits him right in his stitches. So again, the jihadi hitting the CIA, below the belt, really, really nasty or whatever.
So yeah, I think that's a really powerful metaphor. And again, even I'm sure, Tom, you were as I was. I mean, I was rooting for Quinn to kill him.
Oh, of course, because the guy's a complete arsehole.
Right, exactly. So, they're able to tap into that visceral, you want him to kill him in this really grotesque way.
He's got it coming to him. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That he doesn't deserve to live, that he's an idiot, he's stupid, he's brutish. And he deserves to die in a really nasty manner, publicly. And that's it. So yeah, I think it is a really powerful message that they're sending. And I think it's one of those sort of messages that a lot of these CIA productions or CIA assisted projects, be them TV or movies, they will throw in those blatant propaganda type things. But in this case, I think it really did work too, because it plays on multiple levels where even when it's propaganda, you're like, yeah, like fucking kill him, Quinn. And it gives you that sort of rah, yeah, the fucking CIA is cool.
No, I know what you're getting at, because I like you say, I felt the same way about that scene. I actually felt a little kind of rush of triumphalism when he killed him.
Yeah.
But I think we can break it down even a little bit more than you just have. I mean, you've done a very, very good job at breaking down the metaphor. But if you look at the assailant, the guy who's attacking Quinn, he's larger than him, which I guess represents the fact that there's more Muslims out there than there are. Whatever we'd say the other side is. He fights in this cowardly way, like you say. He hits Quinn where he's injured, and that's a bit like maybe that represents use of terrorist tactics, use of suicide bombings, things like that, beheadings.
Mm-hmm.
That they're using these really horrible ways of fighting, and that thus a really clinical, vicious strike from our side is actually preferable to these crude, nasty ways of fighting that they adopt. So you have all that going on as well, that in that character, they've actually built in a whole series of different evocations, I guess, of real world, our real world perception of jihadis, right? That's what he represents. Not just ISIS, but like the whole thing. And so, yeah, absolutely, you're right that it's very effective, that whole, the build up to that. And this is a character who, of course, only exists for one episode and he's now dead. So that's him gone. But then they're quite good at killing off jihadis in this show. But nonetheless, they managed to make us hate him, even in maybe 20 minutes of plotline about him in the whole of this episode.
Yeah.
We hated him and we wanted him to die. And that's, even we did.
Yeah, that's what I mean. That's what's powerful about that kind of, even though it's in your face propaganda. Like I was just talking with my roommate a little while ago, and he was like, "Oh, I caught up the other night," and we were just both like, "Yeah, fuck Hajik, like that dude had to go." And that's and again, and it's such a like this stereotypical version of a jihadi, and it too. It in your head, and yet you're still
repulsed by him.
Yeah, this visceral hatred. It's really effective. And again, we have this sort of that moment where it's sort of like when Langley gets bombed or early on in the series. Again, we have Quinn is injured, and it's this moment, and you're like, no, is he going to get Quinn? And yet, no, Quinn is the triumphant victor in the fight. And you like that. You want that. You want Quinn. And again, you kind of like want Quinn to keep going and like, yeah, take out the rest of these guys.
I guess. I mean, is there anything else you want to say about kind of that side of the storyline, if you like, before we move on to the other half?
No, I think that's kind of it. I mean, I liked, I loved that Quinn had to explain to them that, you do realize the police are obviously watching you. And even the sort of smart jihadi, the guy who's obviously more in control, who probably has real connections, is like, You really think they're spying on us? And it's like, you really think they're not? I mean, come on, dude. They've probably been spying on your apartment building anyway. But that's like pretty obvious. And it was also cool to see Quinn, in his own sort of like, doing what he's good at too, his own spying and espionage and basically convincing them to go to Syria instead of attacking a target in Berlin.
I was going to ask you, what do you think was the purpose of that? Because it's quite blunt the way they do that, where he essentially accuses him of being a coward and says, you're not brave enough to go out to Syria and fight in the real shit. That's why you want to blow up a nightclub or whatever it is you're plotting. Who are they aiming that at? Are they aiming that at actually at jihadis themselves, that message, or?
Yeah, I think they are. I mean, that was what I sort of jotted down during that whole exchange, was that, yeah, they're basically saying that you're, a baby, you're a wimp if you want to, blow up soft targets in the West. You're and Quinn says, I mean, the real jihad is in Syria. The same way that, I think, back in in the 80s, if you were really hardcore, you went to Afghanistan. In the 90s, you went to Bosnia or Chechnya. That's where jihad is really fought. And I think that is deliberate. I think they are trying to say, if you want to go fight, then, come to our sort of playground where we have this much more controlled environment, where we can, and if you watch in the sort of on the next episode, Quinn, the little preview, Quinn is basically like, I think I can get them to the Syrian border and paint the target and you can blow it up. And, Daradal looks like he's, getting an erection, just thinking about that. So, No,
you're right. He has this really creepy look on his
face. So I think, I think that's another message they're trying to send too is, go fight there. Well, because, we can kill you more easily.
Well, for one week, we can keep tabs and kill you more easily. And I guess for another, it means we've got less to mop up over here.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's just easier and it's cleaner and, it's easier to manipulate people in Syria, say, or to get, again, it's sort of, I was sort of thinking, and this because, someone brought up to me, our Four Lions podcast, and I had sort of been watching some clips, but that's what they sort of reminded me of is, like Waj and all these, they're like kind of goofy idiots, they're like, it's sort of like, Hajik, what are you going to do? Do you have bombs? Do you have any access to any of this? I mean, Quinn has spent, before you got released, Quinn was, killing all of your ISIS buddies in Berlin. So sort of like, Hajik, you're great at talking up this big, he's sort of like Barry in Four Lions.
Yeah, he's good at talking the talk. Yeah.
Right. But what are you really going to do? And then they're sort of like, well, I guess now we'll go to Syria, because again, of course, one of them has an uncle, just like in Four Lions, who can get them into Syria.
Everyone's got an uncle who can get them in.
Yeah, right, or Pakistan or something. But and it's just sort of like, and that's, and then they're going to go there and, bumble up that whole thing and probably get vaporized by a drone or, captured and tortured and for information or God only knows what. So yeah, I think they're also just generally, again, portraying, which is interesting. They'll constantly talk about the ever-present threat that these jihadis are smarter than us, that they, obviously, without getting too deep into the, hyperreality stuff, apparently ISIS is very capable of blowing up a Russian airliner. So, it's like they're outsmarting everyone. They're outsmarting the Egyptians, the Israelis, the Americans, the Russians, blah, blah, blah. Yet in media like this, they're portrayed as basically idiots. And again, another interesting factor too is, what were they going to do? Probably nothing. They don't, it seems like they don't really have the resources to do anything until boom, an intelligence operative infiltrates their group and suggests, oh, why don't you go somewhere else? Or here's an idea. And this is how, at least here in America, that's what all of these so-called jihadis that get arrested, it's always an FBI infiltrator who gets into the group, suggests, oh no, I've got a real crazy idea, let's do this, and then suddenly they all get arrested.
They're on tape saying, oh yeah, we should go and blow up the mall or whatever.
Yeah. Oh yeah, let's fly drones into the Capitol.
Yeah.
So
Bingo, bango, bongo, instant terrorist conspiracy. Yeah.
Right. So this is another interesting little. Again, they are telling you what they do. But again, we're supposed to even in that, it's like we're supposed to like that. That's good.
We're kind of supposed to be glad that this lucky coincidence happened with Quinn. I guess because it's now going to be, I assume, a major part of the second half of this season.
Yeah,
is the way it's shaping up. Mm-hmm. But yeah, let's flip over to the other storyline, because that's, like I say, not quite as much fun, but I still did quite enjoy it, mostly because it is the rebirth of Saul as an actual spy, rather than as a fool who gets kidnapped and so on.
Yeah, right.
Though, let's not forget, he is still sleeping with a Russian double agent who he has no clue is a Russian double agent.
I know, that's another really, come on, Saul.
Yeah. But anyway, Saul and Daradal have a proper fight in this episode. When Saul finds out, like you say, via Carrie, that he's being followed, that he's under surveillance by his own people. So Dar demands that he takes a polygraph, he kills his security clearances, all of that. And all of this is subtly being encouraged and provoked by Allison. And so I'm guessing here that the overriding message is just how sneaky the Russians are for messing with the CIA and causing all this trouble. Is there more to it than that, do you think? Or...
No, I think that I also got this sort of Mary Magdalene sort of temptress thing, and not just with Allison, but also again with Carrie. Carrie sort of gets these, seduces men like Quinn and Jonas to sort of go to these extreme lengths for her own weird agenda. And again, we have Allison sort of seducing Saul into this sort of position. So I thought that was sort of an interesting idea. Again, too, Carrie seduces Ayan. She seduces Brody. So that's obviously a theme of, women basically tricking men who should know better and making them do idiotic, crazy things. So that's one thing. But yeah, I think, again, sort of the in real life, jihadis are all powerful. In media, they're stupid. In media, or in shows like this, the Russians are ultra clever, and in reality, if you turn on CNN or Fox or MSNBC, it's the Russians are stupid and brutish and nasty. They're not smart. We know exactly what they're doing.
Yeah, sure.
So I think they're playing up on that too.
Well, this is where I was kind of going with this, is that, okay, the show is anti-Russian. Any fool can notice that. Except for some reason that the intelligence expert who writes a weekly blog on this show, he doesn't seem to have figured out that this is anti-Russian propaganda. So
no.
How intelligent he is, God only knows. But like you say, the portrait we get in the mainstream media in terms of news coverage, in terms of coverage of the real world, is basically that the Russians are fascists.
Yeah.
And that Putin is Hitler. He's some egotistical maniac who wants to take over the world, and he's just a cold-blooded, malevolent bastard. None of this sneaky hand in the bra under the table kind of behavior that we see in Homeland, or for that matter in the other spy shows that have been devoted to this. I mean, if you watch The Americans, it is essentially a succession of sex scenes interrupted with some spy stuff. It really, really is. It's a crap show, to be honest. I really wasn't very impressed by it at all. But we get that these are anti-Russian, but it's this tension between the two portraits. That why is it that in the news propaganda we get this very, very crude and simplistic version of them, but in the entertainment we get a much more sophisticated and in some ways more realistic portrayal of them. Not that the Russians are actually doing this I don't know, maybe they are doing this in Berlin, but certainly they have done things like this, and the Russians are in reality a bit more sneaky and under the table and not so overt Like this portrait of, Putin's invaded eastern Ukraine. It's like, well, I know he hasn't, because that's not the way the Russians behave. That's not the way they deal with these sorts of problems. Sure, Russian special forces and intelligence running around eastern Ukraine, no doubt. But it's not like they invaded with their army in the way that, like, we invaded Iraq.
Yeah, exactly. And overthrew the government.
But that's what they're trying to portray it as. Yeah. And that's a fabrication. So I guess, why is there that tension? Do you have an answer on this one?
I think because, generally speaking, the mass media is there for simple propaganda. Their function is not to cleverly trick people into believing a particular viewpoint. The mass media is the corporate media.
It's tub thumping.
Yeah, exactly. Right. I mean, the paymasters, of CBS and all of these other, these massive corporations, they just want, they want you to hate Russia, and that's the end of it.
And they don't particularly care why you hate Russia, as long as you get the idea that the Russians are the bad guys, and that's about that.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. Right. If you tune in, Wolf Blitzer isn't really too concerned with the details. He's just concerned that that you're supposed to hate the Russians and the Iranians and, whatever, the Chinese. Right. But there doesn't have to be much, something complex about that. Whereas I think,
because Homeland's aimed at a more sophisticated or more select audience, at least anyway. Mm-hmm. You think that's why they're adopting this somewhat more realistic and somewhat more substantial, I suppose?
Yeah, I think it also, it can inflate the ego of the person watching Homeland. That they might watch it and then watch Wolf Blitzer and be like, well, that's not really, totally accurate. I know what the Russians are really up to. So yeah, sort of, making people seem smarter than they are.
So by selling them a different version of the Russians are bad narrative, a more sophisticated and substantial version, you're saying part of the way that they're selling that to them is with a little bit of ego flattery, making them feel a little bit better about themselves for getting it that bit more.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, anyone listening to this can attest to, like when you learn a new piece of information, like if you, like the first time you read about 9/11, it's this like euphoric, sense that this is the truth. Anytime if you read just a history book, the endorphins go off when you're consuming knowledge. So I think that, in some ways that's what Homeland is doing too, is, I think at this point it's pretty obvious that even to the average person that this is a CIA show, at least in terms of like, that they're predicting events before they happen, that, it is clear, you don't premiere the show at Langley and be like, oh, no, it's not really a CIA show though. That's just a gimmick. So I think that, that sort of thing, that sort of like, like true life, this is based on real events, that sort of thing entices people, the same way I think like something like Syriana, everyone knew, oh, Bob Baer is George Clooney. Bob Baer knows what the reality is, people love that, people love reading, ex-spies, when they write their memoirs, people love that. And they eat it up and they accept it as fact. So I think that in some ways that's sort of what Homeland is doing. And it's sort of, broadening out that that, okay, it's a little bit more murky. The Russians aren't just these fascist thugs. There's a little bit more to them, even though they interject that, and they have these, the thug-like diplomat, the Chechen gangster who contracts for the SVR. But even within that, obviously they're harkening back to something like, like the original Tinker Tailor. Or some of the sort of like the spy who came in from the cold, that like the Russians are smart, they know what they're doing, like
if we go back to that scene in the last episode between Alison and her handler, that's really like classic Cold War stuff, you know. In this dark underground garage, and
in Berlin,
and he clearly has some kind of real emotional hold over her. She doesn't want him to leave. She wants him to, just sit there and be with her for a little while because she's so kind of caught up in this double life. And that's actually a very realistic thing, I think, that actually emotionally it must be difficult being a double agent, for one.
I couldn't imagine.
But also that intelligence handling only works if there is actually some kind of emotional bond between the handler and the agent.
Yeah.
And it actually portrayed them as, in some ways, quite human. Almost like a worthy foe, I guess. Maybe that's where they're going with it.
Yeah.
Rather than just this, horrible, crude gang that we have to fight with our gang because otherwise their gang will win. It's no, this is more subtle and complex, and it is actually they're a worthy opponent that it's going to take time. It's not like with those stupid Muslims that we'll just fucking kill them. We're just going to win. No doubt about that. We'll just sooner or later we're going to win. With the Russians, it's more like, well, even if all of this is resolved by the end of the season, they've still caused a hell of a lot of trouble.
Yeah, they're really not going away. Yeah. You're not going
there's no easy victory there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You could maybe defeat radical jihadis, but you're not going to defeat the Russians.
Sooner or later, ISIS are going to be dead, like Al-Qaeda are now.
Yeah. Well, I was just sort of thinking to the worthy foe. That just sort of reminds me I think it's in Smiley's People, the show, at the end when he finally meets Carla and Carla just hands him back the lighter that he stole from him in India. And it's like, hey, good job, man. Like, this is, you bested me. I bested you for most of your life, but you finally got me. And there's that sort of moment of recognition that, like, I mean, it's sick to say, but it is a game for these people, and there, are legitimate winners and losers. And, and a lot of times that's how these things end. It doesn't end with, blowing someone up. It just ends with, that's it. All right. You got me. Good for you. So yeah, there, and again, in I believe in Smiley's People, it takes place in Berlin. So
yeah, I'm pretty sure you're right.
So yeah, I mean, they're definitely they're playing up in this. I think that classic spy drama sort of stuff is really important because, look at us right now. I mean, we're talking about all of these other spy dramas and whatnot. And I think even if you're not like fully immersed as much as say we are in espionage and in, the spy culture, and all of that, I think you'll recognize it instantly. Especially something in Berlin, everyone kind of can get that, like, at least maybe it's more like, now I'm just like throwing out all my favorite movies here, but like The Third Man, sort of post-war Berlin where everyone is running, the Russians are running around, the British, the Americans, the French, everyone is trying to scoop up Nazis and whatnot. Everyone can kind of go back to that. And there's also a sort of a nostalgia too, that was like the good kind of spying, when it was just sort of the, we were doing bad stuff, but it wasn't really that bad, It's not like now where, we're, people are getting beheaded. Well,
can you not? I mean, even despite all of our whatever moral objections to the CIA and so on, I certainly feel I have more of a respect for that kind of espionage than I ever will for military endeavors and assassinations and, sponsoring guerrilla warfare armies and all of this other stuff. The actual process of trying to outwit your opponent, I do. At least they're not killing each other.
That's what I mean. There's something slightly more honorable about that.
Yeah.
At least that it's...
And I feel that there is in reality. Not that I'm trying to defend it. I'm just saying I do have more respect for that than I ever will for those other things that I just can't have any respect for. I just don't.
Yeah. Well, that's true intelligence work. That's not, overthrowing democratically elected governments because you want to,
control their insert whatever.
Right, exactly. Or you want to bring back the opium trade like they did in Iran. That's a really dark, a motive for what you're doing. But right, yeah, tricking the Russians into getting whatever, some information, that's a little bit different. I mean, not that it's good.
I'm not really arguing that or defending it. I just think it's
no, at least
again, it's
people.
a more kind of worthy thing to be doing. At least.
Right. Like a Kim Philby, you may, was he evil? I don't really know about that, but you can at least respect what he was able to accomplish. He was able to trick literally everybody, CIA, MI6, every sort of intelligence agency. And then he got away with it too,
Apart from apparently the Queen Mother, who never liked him.
Right. Well, good for Kim then.
Yeah, whatever. But,
yeah, that's kind of different.
And those sorts of stories actually have a kind of romance and an almost inherent drama to them.
Yeah.
Whereas just crude violence, it's like, okay, it is dramatic, but any fool can be violent. Any fool can change the world by killing someone. But it maybe actually takes someone who's a bit better caliber of person to engage in the world of counter-espionage and actually do anything, even if I think it's ultimately absurd and stupid and all the rest of it. At least, like I say, at least they're not killing anyone. But anything else you want to say about this half of the storyline?
Well, one little thing that popped out to me, and this is maybe a little off topic, but it was to do with Saul and Dar. Is that we find out a little bit more of their backstory, which I really love, because I think way back early on when Quinn was sort of undercover within the CIA, when Dar Adal was running him as some sort of operative to check on Carrie or something, or Brody. And Saul is like, Dar Adal, he's in America, he's back, and there's that weird tension between them. And then later on they're like, then they become friends. And even at the beginning of the season, they're like buddy. But there is that weird thing about, well, what did Itai and Saul do? And why does Dar Adal hate the Israelis and blah, blah, blah. And we find out that Saul leaked 3 names. And he says, I leaked 3 names, 3 terrorist names to the Mossad during the first Intifada. And that Dar Adal was like beyond upset about this, that Saul paid for it, and that Dar Adal has sort of been, carrying this for 30, 40 odd years.
Yeah, dangling it over him in some way.
Right. So who were these people? And was Dar or the CIA running them? Because we know that Dar Adal is cool with making deals with Haqqani. Would he be cool with making deals with Palestinian, operatives? One
would guess so.
Yeah.
If it is Dar Adal.
Right, exactly. And again, I mean, I think there's a lot of truth to that. That, the CIA and the Mossad work together, but they're fine with screwing each other. There's no, you know what I mean? There's no...
I'm sure they still lie to each other.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. And there are... the same way that, the Israelis have agents inside Hezbollah, why wouldn't the CIA have agents inside Hamas or the PLO or whatever? Mm-hmm. That's just obvious. That's secrets and lies. That's spycraft. Yeah. That's intelligence. So
your hypothesis is that the reason why this caused such a trouble is that these guys were in some way assets or something, and that they ended up getting taken out by Mossad because of Saul's leak.
Right. And then it's, Saul is the good, he's sort of they're totally playing up on that kind of, Israel firster type, mentality, or that, Saul couldn't, he couldn't, I don't know, that's sort of like that he would put Israel before America or something like that. So they're obviously playing up on that. I think that's like totally up Dar Adal's alley. That he would totally be working with these people. I have no idea. Maybe Dar Adal is Palestinian. I have no clue as to what his nationality is supposed to be. But that was like, I was like, well, maybe that's it. But I think that he totally had somebody. He had these 3 people were at least assets of his, or they were at least giving him information. And Saul obviously knew about it, and he told Itai, and they assassinated them, and that fucked up some sort of thing. And again, I mean, we're talking about the first Intifada. There's a lot of moving pieces going on in the Middle East right there. So, these three guys could have, they could have been linked to all sorts of, you're talking about multiple countries involved in the Intifada. At least in terms of where everybody, some of these people are in Lebanon, some of them are in Syria and Jordan. Yeah. There's a lot of these three guys could be very connected. Who knows? But yeah, I think that's what happened. And I think that is something that, is between Saul and Dar. And it's just interesting to see their backstory because we don't know why they hate each other, or why they have some sort of issue.
Yeah.
And I don't know, maybe that's sort of the again, that kind of one of those sort of ideas they're trying to put in that, that the CIA is sort of split between, we've got to defend our, greatest ally in the Middle East versus, it makes more sense to collaborate with certain people because we can, prevent things.
Get other things done. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's obviously why Daradal makes a deal with Haqqani. It's just,
of course.
Which didn't really seem to bother Saul, but who knows? Again, I don't think Haqqani is a friend of Israel, but
well, he certainly didn't seem to be one when he kidnapped Saul and was berating him about the Christians.
Oh,
and
yeah,
stuff
yeah,
and the
right.
whole, the Crusades and so on.
Yeah.
So yeah. Oh well, another part of Homeland. Well, it doesn't seem that anything that happened at the end of the last season had any influence on what's happened in this season so far. Yeah.
I think after, Carrie went to Daradal's house, they all got into the Stargate and went back to the other alternate reality, and and everything got reset. But
no, sure, it's like Sliders. They just ended up in a different version of the same world.
Yeah.
Anyway, I mean, I got to say, my favorite bit, actually, probably in the whole episode, was the argument between Daradal and Saul. And I love the way that even after all of this kind of dancing around and thrust and counter thrust, it just broke down to the simple macho, fuck you, no, fuck you.
Right, no, fuck you.
I really like that sort of thing because that is actually, I think, quite realistic dialogue. That's what happens in an argument is you fire your arguments at each other, but by the end, all that's left to say is just, well, fuck you then. But just one thing that I did want to pick up on that we, for whatever reason, didn't spot, failed to mention, didn't remember from the last episode is that all of this is actually taking place in the future. This was established in the last episode when you're seeing Newman's on his computer. And it says the date up in the corner of the window, and it's like April 2016. So it's set about 5-6 months in the future from when it's being broadcast, and therefore almost a year in the future from when it was being filmed. And I just wonder...
Yeah.
I mean, that's not something that they're making obvious, because it was something that I didn't even spot the first or I think even the second time I watched the episode. But it's curious that in as much as this has a setting, that it is in the future, but only just in the future. It's like we're looking at, this might happen next year.
Mm-hmm.
That seems to be pretty much the message of that.
I think that's also one of those things that they put in for the conspiracy theorists.
I guess.
I think that, I mean, you've totally, blown the lid off this with things like spooks and basically predicting 7/7 to the date, however
Seems
many
so, yeah.
I mean, they literally, the episode that predicted 7/7 in its entirety was a year or two before.
It was exactly 2 years before 7/7.
7/7, yeah. So I think something, right, who knows? But I think that is I mean, it's obviously deliberate. I mean, why even make it be in the future?
Why even put a date up on the screen?
Yeah, exactly, right. Or show that. I mean, you can still see Newman typing, but they didn't have to put the date. So, yeah, I think that's definitely deliberate. And I think again too, it's not that far in the future. The same way that Homeland is predicting events that happen not that far or not that late, after the episode. So yeah, I think that's all totally something that we should keep an eye on. And definitely, I forget what the exact date is, but we should find out what it is and see what happens, on that particular day.
Yeah, we should certainly keep an eye out and see if anything does. Chances are it won't, but you never know. You never know.
Yeah, exactly.
A plane bombing or something.
Yeah.
They don't happen that often, so it would be weird if it did happen. Anything else you wanted to say about this episode before we wrap up here?
No, I had just some quick little
Go on.
I just wanted to say I forgot to give a proper shout out to a great listener of mine, Perry Watson, who has been from the very beginning has always supported my work. And Perry, I'm sorry that I only gave you a quasi shout out the last time. And Perry was who I was talking about with Kenya and Israel and all that sort of stuff. And also just say that another longtime listener of mine and someone who always sends me great stuff, Pete, sent me a story that the BND has recently just admitted or got caught spying on the U.S. Embassy, Oxfam, the Red Cross, I think even the Russian Embassy, and this was just a few days before Homeland the story broke about them doing that. So just interesting, again, those sort of weird, confusing sort of bits and pieces in the news. And I'll just say one other little thing. We spent a lot of time last episode talking about Israel and all that stuff, and a story that I just sort of completely missed that happened, I think it was just a few days before the episode came out, but incredibly unprecedented. But the Israeli military intelligence actually issued a formal warning to all of its operatives and everyone in the Israeli military to be very careful about recruitment by the CIA. And this is never happened before. Israel has obviously always warned its soldiers or intelligence agents about recruitment, but they've never publicly done so. And this was I think done on Israel's army radio, which is a huge media outlet in Israel. And they publicly said that this is active recruitment is going on right now. So just very again pointing out that they don't really always get along.
That is an odd story. I have not heard that ever happen before. No.
Yeah, so just something, again, there's always a little hyperreality and everything. And just one last quick thing. I love the sort of idea that they put in here about the chain of command within the CIA sort of being all over the place, where we get, Dara Dal telling Allison to spy on Saul, and then Saul telling Allison, oh, we'll sweep the place. And then Dar is like, why'd you do this? And Saul, well, why didn't you do that? And then the whole sort of chain of command in terms of well, does Saul have security clearance? And that guy doesn't really know. And which is just an interesting idea, because I think that's something that the CIA likes to play up sometimes, is that, oh, it's such a big organization and, things slip under the rug and, oh, damn, 9/11 happened,
No, sure.
So yeah, just those are the only things I had to say.
That's fine. No, they're all little interesting nuggets, by all means. But yeah, I think we'll wrap it up here. So, as always, Pearse, a lot of fun talking to you, and looking forward to the next one.
Yeah, me too. Thanks, Tom.
So that was our review of Homeland Season 5, Episode 6, and obviously for the next in our review series, you will have to tune in to Porkins Policy Radio on Pearse's site, porkinspolicyreview.com. But also coming next week is an extra episode of ClandesTime that is out of the usual schedule, as it's been of late, because Adam and I actually managed to find the time to record a conversation about the film Kingsman that we were much happier with than our first conversation, and so there will be an episode of ClandesTime out next week where we review Kingsman. Until then, as always, I am Tom Secker of spyculture.com, and you've been listening to ClandesTime. So thanks for listening, and take care.